Hi guys, welcome to this tutorial. I'm looking today at the November 20 Christmas Carol question. So obviously there were no summer exams for, well, we all know the reason why there were no summer exams. So this paper, although you may come across it called the June 2020 paper, it was actually sat by students in November 2020. So this Christmas Carol extract was from chapter 3, or forgive me if I call it stave 3, which is the kind of proper word for it, but the exam board always do call it chapter 3, and it is the extract here where Ghost of Christmas Present is coming to the end of his time. He is just about to leave Scrooge, but he introduces to him the characters of ignorance and want. So I'll just let you have a skim over the extract there. Right, okay, so we're going to look today at the question for this paper, which was around the suffering of the poor in A Christmas Carol. So that was a really interesting question, a really good question, very timely, important for us to sort of think about that one. So as ever, we'll start by having a look at the extract, thinking what we would talk about from this, and then we will have a think about what from the rest of the novel, and then I intend to show you an example of a grade 9, not a full response, but how I would open it up. So okay, so let's have a look at this, and the first sort of sign we see of ignorance and want is the reference to Scrooge with this interrogative asking, is it a foot or is it a claw? So I think this kind of ambiguity about the physical shape of the children is quite interesting. They certainly look at first glance to be quite animalistic, and a claw also makes us think of sort of something maybe quite vicious with kind of talons. It certainly doesn't fit with a gentle sort of image of a small child, does it? And we learn from the ghost that it might be a claw for the flesh there is upon it. So there's an image of just the degree to which these children are particularly malnourished. So when we're thinking about suffering of the poor, we could think about this. So let's then look at the description of these children: wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. What we get here structurally is an asyndetic list. An asyndetic list uses commas rather than conjunctions, and it can sometimes have the effect of building meaning or emphasizing something. So you could do quite a lot here thinking about the use of adjectives here, the fact of them being wretched, frightful, hideous and miserable. And I think Dickens uses kind of combinations of words here to sort of create sympathy but also horror. These are designed to be shocking and appalling, but not just the vulnerability but also the sort of horror that these children induce. And we see then the ghost forcing through this imperative man, look here, look down here at the children. He forces Scrooge to confront that suffering, and so we then see that they are a boy and a girl, and this boy and girl who are ignorance and want, they are kind of physical manifestation of poverty. So they are really the personification of these ills from society, I suppose. We get another, sort of coming back up here, we get another asyndetic list, and I think there's think about, again, wolfish. To me, there is something particularly predatory about a wolf, which we wouldn't normally associate with children. And we're told the word graceful youth should have filled their features, and we get this sort of metaphor and personifying idea of the stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. And then this next line on 15, where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. So we get this real contrast with our expectation of what children would be. So it kind of contrasts images of childhood with something sort of very sort of threatening, I suppose. So I think that would be an interesting point to make. And we get also the reference to them being monsters here. And with this kind of going on, he's asking him, spirit, are they yours? And they are man's. It's really important, this use of dialogue here. This spirit is far more confrontational than others. It is very challenging here, the use of dialogue. It is man's, meaning mankind, humanities, and so the sort of the suffering of the poor is presented here as being caused by humanity, and therefore the responsibility of humanity. And then sort of Dickens highlighting ignorance and want, and really sort of these social ills, drawing attention to these children sort of physically represent them, but these are the problems that he sees in society. And he says, beware them both, blah, 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 deny it, cry the spirit. And, you know, when we have a think here about the suffering of the poor, obviously the fact that the spirit repeats back these words, are there no prisons, are there no workhouses, which mirrors obviously chapter 1, and that idea of the suffering of the poor, real criticism from Dickens about the procedures that society kind of puts in place for them. So I've not got a huge amount of room down here at the bottom of my page, but I'm just going to think about links I could make to the rest of the novel in terms of suffering of the poor. And I might think about chapter 1, the charity workers, just because it makes sense to me to make that link to the, you know, are there no prisons, are there no workhouses, Scrooge's initial attitude that poor people are just lazy and sort of deserve punishment rather than support. I would definitely think about that. I'd also think in chapter 1 about Bob Cratchit and, you know, the sort of meagre fire that he has in his workspace. How kind of bleak an area that is. I just remember that when we talk about beginning, we're looking at 1 and 2, 3 for the middle, and 4 and 5. So I would definitely be looking at that. In terms of chapter 2, but I don't know, I'm going to come back to that. Let me just have a think about that. I think chapter 3 is where we see lots of the poverty. You know, we see it in the Cratchits. They are poor but grateful. So I think the Cratchits serve as a way to sort of demonstrate that poor people are not devoid of love, of family, of standards. You know, they are a family who are doing the very best that they can despite the situations they find themselves in. And then he's also shown a number of kind of poorer people also in chapter 3, where you see he goes to kind of see the miners and the sailors, so kind of lots of different poorer work, and again all of them have fires and they're singing, so they're kind of celebratory. So we do see evidence of that. Towards the end in 4 and 5, obviously you could look at things like Caroline and her husband. So we learn about Caroline in chapter 4, who ultimately celebrates Scrooge's death because it means a slight respite for her and her husband. Maybe they won't be made completely impoverished because of that. So and obviously we get any number of other ones in chapter 3 where we sort of get images of the kind of streets of London, and we see the contrast of the wealthy shops and the poorer people living on the streets, and maybe we also think about Tiny Tim's death, which is revealed to us, isn't it, in chapter 4. So we have a little bit of a think like that. Okay, I'm sure you can think of lots of other examples. What I just wanted to do then is to help you consider sort of bringing this together, our ideas together, into something of an essay. Now, what I always try to do is encourage you to do what I would call a thesis opening, but in many ways, a thesis opening is trying to answer that question in one sentence, one sort of evaluative summary sentence, and I try to encourage as part of that a list of 3 attached to it. So I'm engaging with the question straight away. Dickens presents the suffering of the poor as being distressing, preventable, and the responsibility of society. What I might try and do, actually thinking about that, is I'm going to have as a line of argument the idea that often the suffering of the poor in Christmas Carol is represented through children. So you could actually add on to this, and is often reflected in the lives of the most innocent and vulnerable in society, the children. And then it doesn't matter whether you start with the extract or the rest of the novel. As I've said before, the question always says starting with the extract, but you don't have to start with it. It just means this is your jumping off point. This is a place to start from, to start considering your ideas. But if you want to, you can start elsewhere. You've got, to a degree, this is a good extract and you've got it in front of you, so why wouldn't you? But you could start after that little thesis with one of these two openings, so in the extract, blah, 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 or you could focus on another area of the novel and start with, in chapter 1, in chapter 2. My example here is, I'm going to focus on the extract. So, as you can see, I've said it in the extract, Dickens confronts readers with an image of desperate suffering. So anytime I use sort of an adjective, really, a summary word, this is sort of bumping me into that skill of evaluation, which is that grade 9 feature. In this scene, poverty is represented through the personification of ignorance and want. Scrooge is forced to truly see the consequences of his selfish disregard for others. And through these silent but terrifying children, he is told that they and all the poor in society are mans. Dickens deploys vivid imagery to depict the boy and girl. The asymptotic list, yellow, meagre, wolfish, serves to animalise the children. Yellow and meagre draws attention to the sickly and malnourished appearance, but the adjective wolfish connotes a predatory capacity for savagery. So hopefully you can see here, as well as the evaluation, what I am making sure I bring in is the writer's methods. So an asymptotic list is simply one that uses commas rather than conjunctions. And then I'm also focusing on a specific adjective here of wolfish and what that connotes to us. So it's a bit like your language question on a paper 1. And I'm analysing sort of impact of these choices, Dickens' choices here. And going on to explain a little bit more. So when I talk about here, clearly children are often associated with innocence, but these children locked into a life of poverty are instead devils. My commas are a bit all over the place there, apologies. Dickens does not shy away from depicting the gritty reality of poverty, highlighting its corrupting and devastating consequence on even the youngest in society. Now, this is context. I've said this before, but for context, you don't need to say, at the time Dickens was writing, Just focusing on Dickens' purpose and the things he was trying to do as a writer, the points he was trying to make, is sufficient within this. Okay, so this, that would be kind of one of my points about the extract. Just, I haven't sort of finished it off, but trying to then connect that point, I've said likewise, which is a nice comparative sort of sentence starter you can use there. Likewise, in the rest of the novel, the suffering of the poor builds on the bleak outlook for other children, even those with loving but poor families. With Tiny Tim, we learn, blah, blah, blah. So I could probably go on to talk about the vacant seat, the fact that the poverty he lives in means that he dies at a young age. And linking back to, importantly, my point within my thesis, which is around his death being preventable. The very fact that in chapter 5, Tiny Tim doesn't die, after Scrooge becomes a kind of second father to him, is really demonstrating that with care and with love, the suffering of poor people like the Cratchits, some of the dreadful situations they find themselves in, high rates of infant mortality, some of these things can actually be ameliorated by responsibility. Okay, so I hope that was useful just in looking at that 2020 paper and just seeing how I would approach that, making sure I've got evaluation, writer's methods and embedded context. Thank you for watching.